Now we are ready to move on to the final sections, which relate our study of the market process to the legal infrastructure, or the dimension of law and patterned behavior which the market process requires. Everyone please take out a blank sheet of paper and draw a line down the middle, from top to bottom. On the left, we are going to explain what laws are, and on the right, what commands are. By contrasting the two, we will see the different social order or process of social cooperation each brings about. In this economics course, the focus is essentially multidisciplinary. We view economics as the science that studies the laws of social cooperation. It is logical that economics should be closely related to law, which we will define as the set of patterned rules or guidelines that indicate how we should behave in our interactions with others. The trouble is that there are two different concepts of law which people typically confuse, and these go hand in hand with the concepts of law and command that we are going to consider. We will see that each gives rise to a different process of social cooperation. So, let us begin with the concept of law. On the left, we will explain what a law is. Write law in capital letters. The concept of law. That is the important concept, and we will refer to it as, please write this down, substantive law. In other words, the substance or essential content is what matters. On the right, we will note down what a command is. Please write command in lowercase letters, because we will see that commands are radically different, much less important, and in many cases perverse. You see, commands, and this is the problem, often come disguised as laws. They formally appear to be, or are put into force as if they were laws. That is why on the left I have written substantive law, law in a conceptual sense, in terms of content. And on the right, I want you to write command, and then in parentheses, though it may formally appear as a law. When a command appears as a law, it is not a law in the full sense of the word. It is disguised as a law, but in reality, it is a mere command. What I am saying is important, for if you pick up, in Spain for instance, the official state gazette, you will see that nowadays tens, hundreds, thousands of laws are issued, when in reality they are not substantive laws, but mere commands. Keep in mind that we are going to study the conceptual difference between the two, regardless of how they are formally presented. So we have substantive law on the left and command on the right, though it may formally be called a law. Now we will begin by defining what a law is. A substantive law is an abstract rule which deals with general subject matter and applies equally to all. That is, it takes no particular circumstance into account. So, what am I referring to when I define substantive law in this way? I am referring to rules of the following sort. For example, no killing. In other words, homicide, the killing or murdering of a person, is prohibited. This is an abstract rule. It applies equally to all. It takes no particular circumstance into account. So, if I were to kill my wife, I would be a murderer. And if my wife were to kill me, she would be a murderer. A murderer cannot invoke particular circumstances. Well, this man was a Jew, so it was all right to kill him. Or he was an Arab. Or he was a Christian. Or he had blue eyes. These are particular circumstances. I found him unpleasant. Or, listen, my husband was unbearable. He was a scoundrel, and that is why I poisoned him. No particular circumstance is taken into account. Killing is prohibited. The rule applies equally to all. Another abstract rule which deals with general subject matter is no stealing. Swindling is prohibited. Contracts must be honored. This is an abstract rule. It does not specify which contract, nor what particular behavior must be exhibited. It simply states that promises given must be kept, and that is the end of the story. Under any and all circumstances, promises given must be kept. Ownership must be respected. Life must be respected. The actual circumstances do not matter, because substantive laws are abstract general rules which apply under any circumstance regardless of any specific factor. Furthermore, we are all equal before the law. Our behavior is measured by the same yardstick. In abstract terms, we are all equal. No distinction is made. We all must honor contracts, respect life and ownership, not deceive, etc. Is that clear? Okay. This is important, and I am stressing it because we are now going to see what a radical difference exists between this concept and that of a command. On the right, we will define what a command is. What is a command? And take note, as I have said this several times already, it does not matter if the command is issued with words like Tax Reform Law Number 29/2010. That is not a law. That is a command. We will define command as follows. A command is specific legislation which deals with particular subject matter. Note how emphatic I am about this. Please underline specific. A command is specific legislation, something that is legislated which deals with particular subject matter and orders that certain things be done under particular circumstances. Take note, this is crystal clear. Legislation. We are no longer talking about a rule. In fact, we will soon see how rules emerge. They appear in an evolutionary manner, and there is the entire theory of natural law, etc. But now we are talking about legislation. In other words, something developed, issued, and imposed. Legislation. Remember that it is specific. Underline specific. It involves particular subject matter, and it orders that certain things be done under particular circumstances. Note, specific, certain, particular. So, commands include, for instance, all of the poorly named administrative laws, all tax legislation, all regulations, and all intervention directives. There is rampant legislative inflation at all levels of the Spanish government, municipal, regional, and central, not to mention the European Union or the United States. Everything under the sun is legislated. Everything you can imagine. Legislation covers the characteristics of labels, the height of bridges, the content of different foods. These are all commands. They are not laws.
No son leyes. Bueno, pues vamos a entendiendo.
Well, now that we correctly understand the conceptual difference between a law and a command, we will see that each gives rise to an entirely distinct process of social cooperation.
Y vamos a empezar por el punto número 1 de...
Let us begin with point number 1 of comparison and contrast in our analysis. On the left, the law side, right, the law, in capital letters, we have just defined it, allows each human being liberty, or the freedom to act as he wishes and to make the most of his personal knowledge, as he wishes, within the framework of the law.
Luego, como la ley es...
So, because the law is abstract and general,
Siempre que usted no mate, no robe...
within that framework, as long as you do not rob or kill anyone, and you honor contracts, etc., you can do whatever you want to. You can pursue ends of value to you. Seek out means you deem suitable, and develop the life plan you personally choose, within the general framework of the law, which can never be violated. Since the law is abstract, it does not stipulate exactly what must be done. It simply states that you must not kill anyone.
Ajena, que no estafe, que no engañe, que cumpla las...
You must respect life and the property of others. You must not swindle or deceive anyone, and you must fulfill your promises. Do you see that these are abstract rules? They specify nothing about what exactly must be done. Within that framework, the specific materialization is determined by each human being.
mundo, sus objetivos, etc.
Therefore, substantive law creates an environment of liberty, so that each person can develop her own personal powers, worldview, and goals as she thinks fit. Meanwhile, if anything characterizes commands, it is their completely opposite nature. Commands do not allow people the freedom to act. nor to make the most of their personal knowledge. People are not given this freedom precisely because commands, by definition, restrict us, oblige us, coerce us, and force us to exhibit the behavior specified in the command. So, if containers must have a certain height according to the European Union, we are forced to develop and produce containers of that height. We are no longer free. With the law, we are free, because the law is abstract and does not stipulate anything specific. But commands order us to do specific things in particular circumstances, and therefore they coerce us and oblige us to comply. The result is abundantly clear. The law creates an environment of liberty, while commands destroy that environment of freedom. Commands oblige us to manifest certain behaviors. Point number 2 involves the ends each human being may pursue. In the case of the law, each individual may pursue his own ends. Each human being, each man or woman, is the one who creatively seeks out and discovers the ends he or she finds worthwhile and of value. Therefore, each person can freely pursue these ends, within the framework of the law, of course. If the end is to murder people, to kill Jews in a gas chamber, or to kidnap someone, then we are violating the law. Obviously, such ends are out of the question. But within the framework of the law, which, as we know and have just defined it, is very general and abstract, and applies equally to all, each person can pursue the ends she desires. In contrast, on the right, the command side, note down, for point number 2, that the ends pursued are not those of the human being who acts, but those of the authority in power. That is the crucial difference between laws and commands. Commands oblige us, restrict us, and force us to exhibit a specific behavior, and hence they embody a world view and a pursuit of ends which belong to the one in power. And it makes no difference to me whether the one in power is Stalin, Hitler, or a democratic parliament. The obligation to carry out certain behaviors is imposed on us by force, and therefore, when commands prevail, it is no longer our ends which we may achieve, but the ends forced on us by the people in power. Notice that this is a key difference, and that many times it is concealed from us in a devious way. The coercion behind commands is presented to us as something attractive. We are told, listen, these are beneficial, worthy ends. People used to talk about a holy coercion. I do not care whether the authority attempting to impose itself by force is the church, a democracy, a parliament, Hitler or Stalin. The authority imposes its ends via commands, the ends of the one in power, the chief, not those of acting human beings. And here lies the radical difference between ends pursued in the context of law versus the context of commands. Of course, so that we will swallow the coercion behind a command, we are told perhaps, this has been decided democratically, or this command serves the very worthwhile end of heading off global warming, for instance, an issue that is quite fashionable right now. Or conserving nature. The attempt is always made to give an attractive veneer to the boot of coercion, so that citizens will accept it. Their liberty will be limited, and they will be obliged to work towards ends that are not their own, but belong to the one in charge. Immediately, we will see that this has a disastrous effect on social peace. Point number 3. Substantive laws make social peace possible, since they permit individuals to cooperate with each other, even when they are pursuing different ends. Note the great marvel of the law and its effect on social peace. We will imagine that two people have radically different ends. One is a Basque nationalist. His goal in life is to achieve the independence of the Basque country. The other is working toward a strikingly different end. He is a fascist of the Fuerza Nueva party. His fundamental goal is to keep Spain united. Notice that those ends are complete opposites. Well, we know that a law is a general abstract rule which applies equally to all, does not require any specific behavior in any specific circumstance, and allows each person to pursue the ends she wishes as long as she respects life and property and honors her contracts. Within the framework of the law, two people with such radically different ends as those I have just imagined in our example can perfectly well cooperate with each other. Perhaps the fascist is a baker, and the Basque nationalist is a hungry person. Perhaps the fascist makes wonderful bread. Well, in the context of abstract substantive law, the two can cooperate with no problem. How? The Basque nationalist walks past the shop. Oh, that bread smells good. He goes in. How much does a loaf cost? €1. He hands over €1, receives the bread, and walks off delighted, eating it. The fascist is delighted too, and says to himself, there goes another satisfied customer. What would have happened if the Basque nationalist had known the baker was a fascist, and vice versa, or if the two had first been required to agree on their ends? Social cooperation would have broken down, and that is precisely the effect commands have. Point number 3 on the right. In a society based on commands, it is essential that a specific end or a specific scale of ends uniformly predominate throughout society, and that it be imposed on all members of society. A command obliges people to do specific things, and thus accomplishes an end, that of the one in power. Therefore, this end is imposed on everyone. So, in the example I have offered, what was within the framework of the law, peaceful cooperation, even between people who are pursuing utterly opposite goals, becomes, in an environment of commands, a continual struggle for political power. People must gain power in order to infuse their own ends into commands and impose them on everyone else. Peace is replaced by violence, conflict, destruction, and war. In fact, all of the wars you can think of, all of the violence and conflict you can imagine, including the worst genocides, the most recent wars, and all other violent conflicts, strikes, for instance, derive from commands, from the desire to forcefully impose on everyone else a particular end expressed in a command. I repeat, where the law prevails, people do not have to first agree on any goal. Substantive law is simply an abstract framework which does not require any particular behavior in any specific circumstance, and therefore it permits every human being to seek out the ends he believes suitable, and to peacefully cooperate with others in abstract relationships, though the participants may pursue contrary goals. Meanwhile, where commands prevail, an end, that of the authority in power, is first established and imposed on everyone via commands. So naturally, all human beings put their full strength into trying to gain power, both in order to defend themselves against the commands of others involving ends they do not share, and in order to make their own ends the ones that are imposed on others.
Tratar de que sean mis fines los que se impongan a los demás.
So, if you want a peaceful society, you must work towards one structured around substantive laws. If you want to see a violent and troubled society, it will be one based on commands. Point number 4
Sobre cómo surgen
pertains to the ways in which laws and commands arise. Here we see another essential difference.
Miren, las leyes en sentido material
Substantive laws have basically an evolutionary, customary origin.
suetudinario. Es decir, surgen
In other words, they arise throughout history as a result of processes which take a very long time,
de tiempo en los cuales
and in which certain social groups gradually discover that if they adopt particular patterned behaviors, they accomplish their ends more effectively. This discovery is made in a tacit, implicit manner.
hay todos unos teóricos
There are a number of natural law theorists, and I count myself among
en
them.
la teoría, mantenemos la teoría de que hay un derecho
We espouse the theory that an objective natural law exists and incorporates all the abstract substantive rules which we are
a la
discussing,
ley. Bien, es
and which comprise the law. Well, this natural law position is compatible with the evolutionist position.
aunque ese derecho natural
For
esté,
even if natural law exists, and we can have an embryonic intuition of it, the truth is that human beings discover or approach natural law in a constant and asymptotic way. throughout the evolutionary process of civilization. The vast majority of substantive laws are customary from the standpoint of the theory of law. Over time, little by little, they spontaneously emerge in an institutional manner.
la que generación tras generación
Since each generation makes its own small contribution of experience, knowledge, etc.
hay una frase maravillosa
You will find a wonderful statement in Cicero's On the Republic.
que es una cita de Catón, donde dice
It is a quote from Cato, who deemed Roman law far superior to the law of other peoples, because Roman law had not been deliberately created by any particular human mind, no matter how wise. The examples of Lycurgus of Sparta and Solon of Athens are given,
el derecho romano
followed by the assertion that, in contrast, Roman law arose over very prolonged periods of time, centuries and centuries, during which generation upon generation of citizens each gradually incorporated into those substantive laws their own small contributions of experience, knowledge, and sensations. In this evolutionary way, an enormous wealth of practical knowledge was generated, and it greatly exceeds the capacity for assimilation possessed by any human mind, no matter how wise. This is the concept of customary law, as opposed to manufactured legislation, which characterizes commands. Commands are deliberately created.
son lo que se llama una
They are what is called legislation,
que
which comes from the person in power, or the government,
del que manda.
the one in charge. And in this sense, it makes no difference to us whether the one in charge has or has not been democratically elected. In contrast with the natural law, evolutionist conception of law, which provides the foundation for substantive law, in capital letters,
Minúsculas, el fundamento
the
jurídico
legal foundation for the legislation which embodies commands is provided by what is called legal positivism. Its leading representative was Hans Kelsen.
para el positivista jurídico
For a legal positivist, everything a body that represents the people, Parliament for instance, approves is legitimate, whether the law is a substantive law or it concerns the size of labels or a decision to gas the Jews.
es lo que se llama el positivismo.
This is legal positivism, and it strives to provide justification for the legislation which those in power artificially create, and which consists of commands.
Punto
Point number 5.
5. El
The
sistema
system of substantive laws,
material, la ley con
the
mayúsculas,
law in capital letters, which we have just defined, is what makes life in society possible, and what gives rise to the market. That is, the process of social cooperation we know as the market
es un
is a
proceso
process consisting of voluntary exchanges within the framework of substantive laws. Therefore, the law gives rise to the spontaneous market order. The law gives rise to the capitalist system. The law gives rise to peace. Substantive law, the spontaneous order, capitalism, peace. It all goes together. Meanwhile, a system based on commands imposes what is called a hierarchical order. Etymologically, the word hierarchical derives from Greek, hieros and archine. Hieros means sacred, and archine means to rule. Those authorities who wish to impose their ends on us in the form of commands so that we will obey them invariably use two tactics of deception. One, they tell us that the end is marvelous, that the enemy we must fight is wicked, or that we must fight global warming, etc. That is one tactic. Two, they tell us that, furthermore, they are sacred people. I am God, and therefore I am the boss, and you obey me. Hieros, sacred. Archine, to rule. Hierarchine, hierarchical, a hierarchical order. One person gives commands, and everyone else obeys. Thus it should not surprise you that the pharaohs presented themselves as gods. Why? Or that Roman emperors claimed to be gods. Why? Or that in the popular slang of his own administration, a former socialist prime minister was spoken of as God. God said this, God said that. People were referring to the prime minister. Why? Archine, to rule. A hierarchical order arises from a system based on commands, as opposed to the spontaneous, horizontal market order based on exchanges, which arises from substantive law.
Sentido material.
Point number 6. Now we will see what a radically different concept of justice arises from laws versus commands. In substantive law, the concept of justice is very clear. What is justice in the context of substantive law? What is just and what is unjust in the context of substantive law? Well, this is quite simple. Human behavior is described as either just or unjust, and human behavior which takes place within the framework of substantive law is just. And if someone violates substantive law, his action will be deemed an injustice. So, if I kill someone, that is unjust behavior, because I am violating an essential substantive law, one of those abstract general laws which apply equally to everyone and take account of no particular circumstances. The same is true if I defraud, deceive, swindle, or rob someone, or if I commit any other assault on private property. So, justice consists of keeping our behavior within the framework of substantive rules. Remember that no specific content is prescribed. We all decide on that for ourselves, according to our own ends, those we value. Furthermore, justice is blind. That is why she is portrayed as a blindfolded goddess. The law applies equally to everyone, without taking any particular circumstance into account. And therefore, the judge must not see anything concerning the parties in order to avoid being influenced by their particular circumstances. Rather, the judge must simply rule in an abstract and general manner. Listen, have you murdered someone? Well, then you are a murderer, and I do not care about any particular circumstance. Have you robbed someone? Well, the same is true. In the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, we read, "You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, the greater danger, or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor." And justice has her eyes covered, so that she will not see any particular circumstance. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. Of course. Here, judge, have a few million, and please rule in my favor. Or, boo-hoo, they are kicking me out. I am not paying the rent, but they are turning me out on the street, and I will be living on the street with 14 children. Oh, you poor thing. I feel so sorry for you. Well, even though you have broken the law and are not paying the rent, you may stay in the house. That is a terrible injustice. Particular circumstances do not matter, and thus if you violate the law, the abstract framework of substantive rules, you are committing an injustice. Note how clear the concept of justice is. In the context of substantive law, justice hinges on whether or not one's behavior stays within those rules. In addition, justice is blind to any specific circumstance, because we are all equal before substantive law. Meanwhile, in the sphere of commands, the concept of justice is radically different, though the same term is used. There is a profound corruption and prostitution of the concept of justice. Justice, in the traditional sense, is corrupted and prostituted in what is known as social justice. Take note. Whenever a qualifier is added to a term, the term is corrupted. Hayek referred to such qualifiers as weasel words, because we are constantly being manipulated, and many words have a strong social appeal. These are given qualifiers so that we will take the bait, and without realizing it, we will be manipulated and go in the direction desired by those who wish to coerce us. Thus, people talk about popular democracy. Well, a popular democracy is the exact opposite of a democracy, and they talk about a social constitutional state. Listen, a state is either constitutional or it is not, but why add the word social? And we hear of organic democracy. Organic? What does this mean? Does it have to do with organs? Franco's system was called organic democracy. It was not democracy. And then there is social justice. Look, either it is justice or it is not justice, but do not add the qualifier social. The moment social is added, the concept of justice is completely prostituted. It no longer has anything to do with the concept we have just discussed. I repeat, according to the traditional concept, justice hinges on whether or not our behavior stays within the framework of substantive rules. Furthermore, justice is blind. She must not allow herself to be influenced by particular circumstances. She must not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great. In contrast, what is social justice? Well, social justice is the concept of justice which emerges in the sphere of commands. It is the more or less emotional impression the judge forms of the result of the social process at a specific time. I halt the social process, and in an instant I take a photo, and I look at it and say, "Oh, I do not like what I see. There are a few very wealthy multimillionaires here, and many poor people. Social injustice. I do not like it." Obviously, the just thing to do is to take from the rich and give to the poor, is it not? And everyone says, of course, especially if people are sold the idea that they are among those who will come out ahead in net terms, because they consider themselves poor. Let others pay, and let the money be given to me. Of course, social justice. Take note. What before was traditional justice now becomes pure arbitrariness, which, according to whim or privilege, justifies the greatest injustices conceivable from the traditional viewpoint. For when I judge that I do not like what I see, and that we must take from some people to give to others, because there is inequality and social injustice, what am I justifying? Violence, robbery, coercion. That is, the most unjust behaviors imaginable. With the concept of social justice, all that matters is the impression I get of what I see, regardless of how the human beings involved have behaved in the process. I see there are a few wealthy people and many poor people. I say social injustice. Let us take from some and give to others. Well, just a minute. Should we not analyze whether these people who have a lot have behaved correctly from the perspective of substantive law? If they have a lot and have not robbed or murdered anyone, and they have respected the property of others, and they have honored their contracts, their behavior has been fundamentally just. And what you are doing now is, in a corrupt and prostituted manner, justifying violence and coercion, which are precisely the most unjust behaviors conceivable. The concept of justice is corrupted. New concepts are invented, like the notion of social sin. Listen, I have behaved very well. I have kept all of the commandments. I have been good, etc. No, you are part of a social sin. What? Yes, structures of social injustice exist. How can there be structures of social injustice? What are they? And who decides? What is more, the prostituted, corrupted concept of social justice is the biggest trap you can imagine. If a judge stops basing decisions on objective, substantive law and begins basing them on impressions, all legal certainty and the entire concept of justice disappear. Whether you win or lose a lawsuit will depend more on how you manage to impress the judge, rather than on good or bad behavior, from the perspective of objective, substantive laws. A skillful lawyer will be one who says, "This poor woman, look at the condition she is in." And the poor lady will be there coughing and dressed in rags. They are going to turn her out on the street with 6 children. It is true that she is not paying the rent, but she is in a terrible situation. Now, look at the owner of the property. Look at him. He has a pot belly, a snout like a pig, and a gold watch. He is a millionaire. What difference does it make to him if he is not paid? And the judge will say, "You are right. There is a grave social injustice here. You may stay in the house, ma'am, even without paying." And the lady leaves the courthouse delighted. She walks out of the courthouse, and do you know what happens next? She takes off her ragged coat, puts on a mink coat, and climbs into a Mercedes. Could that happen? Maybe so, maybe not. But my point is that there is complete arbitrariness. If you do not believe me, consider juries. There the problem is even worse. In other words, if you would like there to be some justice in the future, in case you are ever tried, let us hope you never face a jury trial. When there is a jury, what do lawyers do? Do they focus all of their skill on finding out whether, from the standpoint of substantive laws, the behavior of the defendant has actually been bad? No. What they seek to do is to impress the jury. And how do they do that? Well, with social justice arguments. The accused is then doomed. In an environment of commands, an end is pursued, and it has been chosen by the authority in power. Justice or injustice depends on how consistent a situation is with that end which the authority wishes to impose from above, regardless of whether or not participants in the social process have kept their behavior within the law in the substantive sense. The concept of justice is thoroughly prostituted, and the most unjust behaviors conceivable are legitimized, violently taking from some people to give to others, while disregarding whether or not the abstract general rules of substantive law have been complied with. Social justice removes the goddess's blindfold and gives her some rose or blue-colored glasses in order to see what impression she forms of what she sees, and to determine, based on that, ad hoc, and depending on the circumstances of the case to be decided, what she thinks is best. Thus, all legal certainty and all traditional justice disappear. The key to a successful trial outcome no longer consists of being legally right, but rather of making a favorable impression on the judge or jurors. As a result, more and more lawsuits are filed, because everything depends on the luck of the draw. So, maybe, if we are lucky, consequently, judges have an excessive workload. Their rulings are more and more imperfect, and so on, in a gradual breakdown of justice, which unfortunately we are witnessing at very close range. And that prostitution of justice becomes increasingly entrenched as the influence of commands increases and the influence of substantive laws decreases. Point number 7 in our comparison. A system based on substantive laws gives rise to what is called the free market economic and political system, a market economy, as we have already said, the spontaneous market order, and a libertarian system in which the government does not intervene. It is a government limited by the law. Substantive law itself limits the authorities. The authorities are not above the governed, but on the same level. They cannot be arbitrary. We can turn to the courts to sue our authorities. Meanwhile, a system based on commands gives rise to the opposite. It gives rise to what is known as the statist system, the socialist system. Take note, statism is referred to as socialism so that we will swallow it. And I do not care whether it is left-wing socialism or right-wing socialism. In a nutshell, socialism is characterized by the use of coercion in order to impose an end. And those in power try to make the end attractive to us by telling us that it is income redistribution, or that we are combating environmental damage or global warming. Any worthy end you can think of, but imposed by force. Point number 8. We are going to see that privileged special interest groups play a significant role. In a system based on substantive law, the hidden interference of privileged special interest groups is prevented. Substantive law applies equally to all, and therefore no one can ask for an advantage for himself and impose it using the force of the state. So, a system based on substantive laws is a system free from the destructive influence of special interest groups. To put it another way, a traditional way, this is the only system that promotes the common good. A system based on substantive laws promotes the common good, because the common good consists of the spontaneous market order within a framework of substantive laws. Meanwhile, in a system based on commands, the concept of common good is prostituted. The common good becomes the good of those in power, whatever the people in power consider to be the common good, or it becomes the good of the prevailing pressure groups at any given time. Every Sunday, when I hear the prayer, "We pray for our rulers, that they will pursue the common good," it really gets my goat. I feel like jumping up and saying, "Stop talking nonsense! We should be praying that there will no longer be any rulers to govern us, and that what remains will be a system of substantive laws, because the spontaneous process represents the common good. The moment you say that the common good should be imposed from above via commands, we are all doomed. Everyone has a different idea of the common good. The peaceful process of cooperation turns into struggle and conflict. There is no longer any common good, or the common good consists of the hidden good of the privileged group which prevails at any given time, and is able to forcefully impose its ends on everyone else. So, take note. This is very important. Substantive law makes it impossible for those pressure groups or privileged special interest groups to exploit and manipulate us because everyone can do as she wishes within the framework of substantive laws. Meanwhile, a system based on commands attracts like a magnet the particular desires of pressure groups, which attempt, in collusion with each other, to gain power in order to impose their own particular ends on everyone else by force. Now let us conclude with the final point, point number 9, which is a sort of recap of what we have studied so far. As we have already seen, substantive law gives rise to the spontaneous and abstract order, and the spontaneous and abstract order has made possible the advancement of civilization, though the process has not been smooth. We have never had a system based purely on substantive laws. The greed, covetousness, and selfishness of privileged groups have always posed a threat. Substantive law makes the spontaneous order possible. In fact, it makes possible an order which benefits all who participate in it, even when they do not know each other. Thus, substantive law permits widespread help, a quid pro quo, or a do ut des. I give, so you will give. Not only with the people close to you, but above all, with those far away, even those you will never meet. There is greater merit in this. I have some Adidas that were made in Singapore or in China, and as a result, many Chinese or Asian people who I will never meet are earning a living and prospering. Listen, giving money to a beggar covered with sores at the door of a church has merit, but the merit is very relative and slight because I can see him, and I am keenly aware of his situation. Anyone but a real brute would look at him and say, well, let's give him 10 euros. Greater merit lies in a system which, by a process of peaceful cooperation, based on substantive laws and equality before the law, permits us to give even to someone we do not know and have in front of us, someone thousands of kilometers away. In a system of substantive laws, the only just equality is equality before the law, and any other equality people attempt to impose is unjust by definition. Such a system has come to be known as an open society, a term which gained currency due to the works of Karl Popper, the spontaneous order, undeliberate help via the market, which benefits even people we do not know. Equality before the law, which prevails over concepts of loyalty. I no longer need to be loyal to my country, nor to the white race, nor to those of my religion. Instead, I must respect life and the property of others, and I must honor my promises, whether the other person is Chinese, Buddhist, atheist, white, black, Jewish, etc., in a peaceful, universal order, an open society. Meanwhile, a system based on commands gives rise to what is known as a closed society. A system based on commands rests on an atavism. It rests on what we could call the emotions of the tribal society, in which we have been immersed for hundreds of thousands of years, until practically yesterday in human history. And the tribe in which we have been immersed was based on principles and parameters that differ radically from those of an open society. To begin with, it was based on a hierarchical order, hieros, sacred, archine, to rule, under a tribal chief, perhaps a Native American who wore feathers to show he was the chief, or a medicine man. The atavism of the tribal period consists of a desire to transpose tribal ties to modern society. And what do I mean by tribal ties? I repeat, 1. A hierarchical order. 2. Help for the neighbor we know. I help people from my own tribe, people close to me, and in need, but those people only, not anyone else. And the members of other tribes? Screw them! Who ever heard of helping them? And 3. loyalty to the tribe. The essential principle is loyalty to those of my own tribe. Spanish patriotism and screw the French. Such is a closed society based on commands. Hayek makes a nice digression. He points out that human beings have begun to come into contact with an open society very recently. We have talked about the Industrial Revolution, which took place practically the day before yesterday, only 2 centuries ago. What is that in 1,000,000 years of human history? Almost the entire history of mankind has been a tribal history, a history of hierarchy, a history of loyalty to the tribe, a history of struggle, of violence, a history of social justice, in other words, of injustices. And we have come to the spontaneous order only very recently. Often this makes us dizzy. It is what Marx referred to disparagingly as alienation. We are alienated because we form part of an abstract order we do not control. But this order is a blessing from God that permits us to cooperate peacefully in an environment of continuous economic development without needing to show loyalty to any chief nor to any tribe. Also, we cooperate with everyone else in the world, in a globalized world. But a struggle takes place. Many human beings have an inner struggle, and the fact that mankind lived for 1,000,000 years in the other environment explains the very powerful emergence of those tribal atavisms, and the attempt to impose them with tragic consequences for life in society. It also explains the existence of mechanisms or procedures which, on a human level, permit people to satisfy those tribal needs. For instance, primary groups such as the family. Of course, the family is a hierarchical environment. There are a father and a mother who are in charge, and children who obey, and rightfully so. There is first-hand knowledge. The father knows that one child has certain strengths and weaknesses, and another child has others, and the father performs a redistribution. Well, since this child is a little slower, I'm going to give him a little more, or a higher allowance. The father has first-hand hierarchical knowledge about his sons and daughters who are close to him, and he helps the one with the greatest need. He shows family loyalty. The family is a primary group, and it maintains, so to speak, our age-old tribal tradition. After a long day of work in the market, in the abstract sense, we get home to find that emotional need met. There are other procedures as well. Some highly distinguished, responsible people do business in the market, and then when Saturday or Sunday rolls around, "Shh! Real Madrid is playing Barca!" And ladies start shouting, "Bastard! Son of a bitch!" Everyone is there saying, "Game on! Real Madrid against Barca!" Or maybe, "Go Spain!" And terrible insults fly back and forth. And at the end of over 2 hours of soccer, people have let off steam. They have satisfied their atavistic tribal instincts. The tribe was Real Madrid, or Barca, or Atleti, or whatever, and people go home at peace with the world. So soccer acts as a safety valve. We could talk a lot about all of this, but the point is that such instincts still weigh heavily on human beings. Perhaps in another 1,000,000 years we will have genetically and culturally forgotten these tribal atavisms. Perhaps we will take refuge in only the most basic primary groups, like the family. To a large extent, this explains our frequent desire to extrapolate the tribal framework of the family to the framework of society, and say, is there a problem? Well, let us appoint the current good guy. In other words, Rajoy, Zapatero, or whomever, and he will impose his ends on everyone and use coercion to solve problems. And then we are in trouble. And it makes no difference to me whether the party is right-wing, left-wing, or centrist. There will be conflict, violence, injustice, etc. Friedman asks whether a true democracy is possible in the absence of a market economy, private property, and capitalism. And the answer is no. It is not possible. Friedman reasons that in a democracy there must be liberty to consider, propagate, and explain the different political platforms, so that citizens can choose between them. Then Friedman poses the following question. What would happen in a socialist environment in which all the means of production were publicly owned? The printing presses, television and radio stations. We could be talking about communist China. But there is no need to go to communist China, because in Spain, a significant number of the TV stations are state-owned, and you already know the conflicts that causes. If someone has an idea that is viewed as subversive from the perspective of the authority in charge, do you think the person will be given paper to publish the idea in a newspaper? Will he be given financing to print books? To produce pamphlets to distribute in the streets? Will he be given television airtime? No matter how much legislation is issued, what happens in the end? Even in a nominal democracy like the Spanish one, the news is manipulated. Everyone is eager to gain control of Spanish television. Why? And the opposition complains, hey, the administration has had 15,000 minutes of airtime in the week before elections, and the opposition has had only 8,500. In short, as socialism, the degree of public ownership of goods increases, it becomes more and more difficult for so-called subversive ideas to prevail, or ideas judged to be so from the perspective of the authority in power at any particular moment. For that reason, people have been able to defend socialism only in the context of a market economy and a capitalist system. It was in Victorian England, or Europe during the Industrial Revolution, in a capitalist free market system, that Marx and Engels were able to publish their books without being persecuted. Do you think it is possible to do the same just as freely in communist China? Or was it possible in the former Soviet Union? No way. Therefore, true lovers of democracy should start by defending a free market economy. In a free market economy, there will always be someone, no matter how gullible, willing to finance even the most absurd proposition imaginable. In fact, Engels himself, Marx's right-hand man, owned factories in the textile industry. He embodied precisely what the Marxists most hated. He was the typical exploiter of the toiling masses. And there was nothing proletarian about Marx either. He was the son of a very wealthy German lawyer.